Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. Once you hear from our next guest, I am sure that you will agree that he deserves the moniker of interesting person. Saving America welcomes Chad Peace, who's a nationally recognized leader in election law, voter rights, and 40 under 40 winner from the American Association of Political Consultants. He is an attorney and legal strategist for the Independent Voter Project. Chad developed the voter outreach strategy for California's successful nonpartisan primary initiative and conducted the campaign to draft a current United States Senator for office. He manages voter outreach efforts in local, statewide, and national elections, including a major candidate for President of the United States. We welcome Chad Peace for his first appearance on Saving America.
Well, thanks for having me. Nice to be here. I don't know if I fit your interesting person moniker, but I like to think so.
Well, you got it from us. You can certainly decline the invitation, but you didn't, and so we're happy to have you here as one of our many interesting people. So, from your base in San Diego, you accomplished something special a decade ago. Please share with the audience the meaning of Proposition K.
Measure K in San Diego. In San Diego, we've had nonpartisan municipal elections since our history. But at that time, candidates, if they got 50% or plus one of the vote in the primary, they'd be declared the winner and there would be no general election, right? So a lot of your listeners may be familiar that, substantially more people vote in the general election, usually more than twice, right? So really, anybody that was an operative and knew how the game worked, right? The goal of all the consultants was to try to, load all the money and load all the stuff, and so that you would get candidates elected in June. And really, the general, like, there'd never really be a discussion about who the next representative would be because they'd get elected in the primary. So Measure K was simple. So you can't get elected in a primary. Primary elections are for nominating candidates, and the general election is for electing representatives. So that's really all Measure K did, and it passed. It passed decisively, and they went on to adopt the exact same model at the county level.
And how does that tie in with the state level? And normally, I don't follow internal California politics very closely, but you have a very, very interesting looking gubernatorial race coming up. What are your thoughts about the California top two primary system? I think they call that the jungle primary. I'm not sure what that word came up with, but
I
yeah. Okay, go ahead, tell us.
Well, jungle was the most pejorative way to describe a nonpartisan primary. And so,
Ah.
there's interest on both sides that say, if you tell voters, do you like a jungle when you go to vote, they're gonna, eh. If you tell voters, do you like a nonpartisan primary, they love it, right? So that word, it's been adopted, is widely accepted as a way to describe a nonpartisan primary. I personally take a little bit of offense to it, but it is what it is.
Well, what do you think about the way the race is shaping up, and specifically as we speak? I understand that Steve Hilton and a sheriff are the top two in the jungle primary. Does that mean that you guys are going to have an all Republican gubernatorial competition here? I mean, this seems kind of unlikely.
It is unlikely. I mean, it could happen. I'm not gonna say it's not, but the chances are small. But if you compare it though, I actually like the attention on this matter, right? And saying, okay, what are some of the unintended consequences of a top two nonpartisan primary? One can be because of the situation you're seeing as governor, just simply by circumstance of who decides to run, right? If a few Republicans run and a whole bunch of Democrats divide the field, could end up with two candidates from the minority party in this case, right? Um, I go and say, okay, that's an unintended consequence. What's the solution? To go back to an old closed primary system? Let's take a state like New Jersey that has closed primaries. 50% of the electorate's independent, so they're by law precluded from voting in an election they pay for. And then you have turnout in the route in 10 to 15%. crunch the numbers and you have people being elected as the representatives to be on the general election ballot by about 2% of the electorate. So by comparison, getting 17% in a California primary is much more representative than 2% in a New Jersey primary under a closed system. All right. But the natural conversation goes, okay, is there something better? I would also say, well, turn to Alaska. If you're going to say, hey, look, this is a kind of there's a random narrowing of the field too early in the election cycle, and we might end up with results that aren't really reflective of where the electorate should be voting in the general election. We'll turn to Alaska. Alaska has a nonpartisan model, but they advance four candidates instead of two, right? So
Ah.
they narrow the field, but not as substantially. And then how do you reconcile the general election of not wanting somebody to get elected with 25% of the vote in the general is you implement something like a ranked choice voting system so that people can rank their candidates and that you get true majority winners.
Well, the whole question raises an interesting point, the statistic you just mentioned, and
Mhm.
we had some very bitter primaries here in Texas on March 3rd, and it's the keynote race was actually for U.S. Senate, John Cornyn, who's already been in office for over 20 years, was in a brutal competition with a little known candidate who ran an incredible amount of advertising. I don't know where all the money came from. And then the current Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton. And
Mhm.
it was interesting because last I heard, Paxton and Cornyn basically ended up in pretty much a tie. I don't know if that would have happened if the third leading candidate had not been in there.
Mhm.
But I know President Trump has asked that they not have a contested runoff, which would
Mhm.
happen in early May. But I was shocked at the amount of money that was spent, and yet the Republican turnout was very small. In fact, people made a lot of it because it's a red state, so to speak. But
Mhm.
the Democrats in the primaries turned out at 3-1
Mhm.
relative to Republicans. And as you said, it's not very representative of the populace, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, turnouts in primaries are substantially different than the general electorate. They tend to be highly more partisan. Texas has an incredibly interesting situation, right? With a history of not registering your party with the state, right? Which I think is a voter should be registered as a voter, not as a member of a political party personally. All right. But that's been Texas's history, right? And you actually have the attorney general here who is um, has sided with his political party to challenge the open primary system and try to implement closed primaries, right? And so you have kind of two different viewpoints here. Interestingly, Jane Nelson, also a Republican and Texas Secretary of State, has really stepped into the shoes of the Attorney General and said, look, I'll defend Texas's open primary. What the core issue comes down to, how it's relevant to this race, right, is that primaries in and of themselves already have a smaller electorate. The fight now is about whether the nominee in that primary should represent even narrower fringe of the electorate, those who are willingly join a particular political party, right? So what the Independent Voter Project advocates for, and I've represented for almost 15 years, right, is the lowercase I independent voter. And our premise is very simple, that elections are supposed to serve voters of all parties, right? If private organizations want to have their own nomination processes, they can utilize their money however they want. We're not anti-party, really party agnostic. But to say, look, elections serve a public purpose and you have to treat all voters the same. So if you take the position that the state apparatus, like Ken Paxton is arguing, the state apparatus should, one, require you to register your party with the state, which I don't think is a conservative position, but that nevertheless, that's Ken Paxton's position. One, and then say, now we're going to take your tax dollars, we're going to conduct a primary election that's going to determine the candidates in the general election, and you, if you refuse to join a party, you don't get a vote, even though you paid for it, right? So Our position is very simple. Say, no, that's not the right position. The state is one apparatus and the private political parties are another. And that the state serves the voters, the private parties can serve their private association. So those are the right. And so if you relate that to, okay, why is California so different? It's really simple. The legal and political purpose of Texas primary is like 47 other states. The stated purpose is to elect a nominee to represent the political party on the general election ballot. California, the jungle primary, as they call it, as I mentioned, I think is a pejorative term, but is really a nonpartisan, is party agnostic. The legal and political purpose of it is not to elect anybody from a party to be on the general election ballot. It's much more simple than that. It's simply to narrow the candidate field. That's it, right? So the rules are agnostic in California. In Texas, your party as a factor, but it's not as bad as some states. States like New Jersey have purely closed primaries, right? Where you can't vote in a Republican or a Democratic primary unless you're registered with the state. Texas currently does not have registration by party, which is why they have an open primary and why they say, look, you can choose which party's election to vote in because the state's agnostic to what your party is.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that because I'm actually one of those unaffiliated voters, and I do vote in the primary, but I get to show up. But one of the problems that we have run into, and by the way, if you vote in a party's primary, you're required to vote in the runoff of the same party. You can't switch
Right.
in between. So they do have a little bit of a rule, although I'm not sure how they track that, by the way. And of course, on these runoff elections, even fewer people show up.
Right.
I mean, it's a pretty crazy deal. But I'm kind of a beneficiary of the open primary because of my particular political viewpoint. Although years and years ago, when I ran for office, I learned after two elections not to do that. But it's interesting because the allegations are crossover voters. Is people will cross over deliberately and vote for the weaker candidate in order to create a better outcome for their preferred candidate in the general election. And that is something that has consistently been alleged here in Texas.
Mhm.
And so I'm not sure how much stat is on it, but it is kind of interesting. Hey, you made reference a moment ago, of course, in our introduction, we talked about the Independent Voter Project. Can you tell our audience a little bit more about that and what the goals and objectives are?
Yeah, well, most simply, I mean, 1996 Independent Voter Project was formed in part a reaction to the California Supreme Court declaring California's old blanket primary system unconstitutional. So California went from an open system similar to Texas. However, we also had registration by party. So First Amendment implications were involved. The parties asserted their First Amendment right to exclude independent voters from participating. The Supreme Court agreed. As a consequence, the legislature went back to closed primaries or semi-closed primaries. So at that state, right, put yourself in your back in your shoes. Now all of a sudden you could vote, now you can't. Independent Voter Project was created to say, look, everybody should be able to vote, including David, even though he exercised his right not to join a party. And so, hence, that's why we have a nonpartisan primary. Independent Voter Project authored a nonpartisan primary, said, look, parties want to assert their First Amendment right in this nomination proceeding. Well, this is the state. The state doesn't have to give you a nomination proceeding funded by the taxpayers. So the state giveth, the state taketh away. And that's most simply why California has nonpartisan primaries. And so we've been
That's a
type of work ever since.
that's a pretty interesting path. But is there any secret, do you think, and can the Independent Voter Project help with the underlying issue, which is we've got to get people to show up and vote in the primaries?
Well, I think yes, but it's not direct. I think voters will come out and vote if they think there's something worth voting for, right?
Hmm.
The reality is, as the system has become more divisive and you have more, candidates that are solid red and solid blue, there's less and less reason for independent-minded voters to come out and vote. And most people, they're just not nearly paying as much attention as people like you and I. So they just kind of see, oh, this is just this muddy mess. This guy's going to say that guy sucks. This guy's going to say that guy sucks. And, let them figure out who sucks. And then, we'll pick the one that sucks less in the general election, right? And that's how kind of a lot of people, I think, view the system, right? But the incentives are aligned to have people that are solid red and solid blue run in the general election because as this system exists now, that's how they exist. So, how does independent voter project our our legal argument, our long-term legal argument, which we hope will someday be brought up by the Supreme Court, is most simply every voter, regardless of party, shall have an equally meaningful right to vote at every stage of the election process,
Mhm.
including primary elections. Our belief is if candidates are forced to respond to a broader swath of the electorate, candidates will then represent a broader swath of the electorate, and most importantly, they will talk to, right? Why is there low turnout? Well, if you're a consultant, the only voters you spend money trying to turn out are the voters you know are going to vote for you, right? The voters you know voted last time, right? So there's a whole swath of the electorate that nobody's even telling them there's a primary, let alone there's an importance to vote, because nobody has it in their self-interest for them to participate.
So if you don't feel like your friends are going to show up and vote, you'd rather not have anybody show up and vote.
Right. Exactly. I mean, that's how the system is now. Even in California, by the way, which has nonpartisan primaries, because I mean, nationally, all the money, all the structures, all the industry, all the political conversation is organized around these two political parties. And so just the incentives aren't there to talk to voters who you look, why would I spend a bunch of money driving this voter out to the polls if they might not even vote for me?
Absolutely. Well, like I said, I've been there and done that. And I have to say, speaking of the primary process, I haven't seen a candidate on a ballot in many years that I was super excited to see. Again, talking about the high profile races, I've got people that I personally like who've run for, the joke about running for dog catcher, which actually
Right.
is not a position, but your city council slots and people, the city controller, things like that. So I have had some good people get elected to those positions, but on the high profile races, the kind that we're talking about today,
Mhm.
I really haven't seen anybody that I thought, gee, let me, camp out all night to make sure I can cast my vote and all that, and not feeling it, but maybe it'll get better. And I'm in one of the things we do here on Saving America is I do encourage people to get out and vote and to participate and to run for office because I bet you there's a lot of good people sitting on the benches out there
Yeah, absolutely.
and all that. We try and keep these interviews short so people actually listen to them. How can our audience get more information about you and all these election-related activities?
Well, our organizational website's independentvoterproject.org. It's pretty easy to remember. You can Google it, or our news website where we talk about issues like election reform and all the different things happening, whether it's in California or New York or Texas, including the fight right now between the Secretary of State and the Attorney General. We cover it on ivn.us, and it's news made specifically for independent-minded voters and voters that are interested in reforming the election system.
Well, that's fantastic. Chad Peace, we appreciate your being here today. This is Dr. David D. Schein for Saving America. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to subscribe on YouTube at Dr. Dave Saves America.
Thank you, David.
I want to mention a special promotion that we're running on our YouTube at Dr. Dave Saves America. We have passed 1,000 subscribers and we're now on the road to 3,000 subscribers. And if you're interested, in the comments, tell us if you want Bad Deal for America or you want Decline of America. We will be having a drawing after we pass the number 3,000, and people who have posted that they want to be in the drawing and indicate which book they're interested in, and we'll be sending them that particular book. And we appreciate your listening, and we appreciate your participating at our YouTube channel at Dr. Dave Saves America.